Alright, can episode 2 make up for the lackluster first episode? No, not at all. This is going to be a short summary because this is another episode that cares about setting things up as opposed to adding to the story. We pick up where we left off with everyone aboard the airship to Beacon. On the airship, we have Ruby and Yang talking about making friends and Yang trying to find someone to talk to. Weiss notices Pyrrha and starts thinking about joining her team. Ruby and Yang talk to Blake, and the conversation drifts towards Ruby wanting to be a huntress to make the world a better place. The conversation is interrupted when the news comes on and does the same thing as the news broadcast in the original. They have double the time of the show, and yet they spend it so poorly. Then for some reason, Ruby and Yang talk about the rumors surrounding the Schnee Dust Company. Weiss overhears and gets angry and bitchy, and Blake pours gasoline on that fire before Yang tries to smooth things out. This fails, and when Ruby tries to be nice to Weiss, she gets sarcastic and says to never speak to her again. So pretty much everything that happens in the original just packed into 5 minutes and set on the airship instead of all over the school. Osmond appears as a hologram and explains the initiation test. It's the same as the original, so just go watch the original if you want a synopsis. Then the locker room conversation happens, except this time people actually react to Pyrrha's name, and Weiss acts like a creepy fangirl. John also makes his first real appearance here and is just as much of a dumbass as in the original conversation. The big difference between the original scene and this one is that Pyrrha doesn't talk to John until later in the episode, whereas before she talked to him pretty much right after. They then arrive at the cliff and are launched into the forest just like the original. Then we get introduced to a new character, Shion Zaiden or something like that. Some witchy-looking motherfucker who shows up and talks to Ozpin about how a particular Grimm is in the forest, and then they fuck off out of the episode. So, back to the actual plot, we see the girls land in the forest, with Yang, Ruby, Pyrrha, and Weiss, and presumably everyone else landing just fine, with John being the only one needing a save. He gets saved from the fall by getting pinned to a tree by Pyrrha, just like in the original. Weiss and Ruby get paired up, and that was a comical scene in the original, is now played very seriously in Ice Queendom. In the original, Weiss and Ruby made eye contact, making them partners, but Weiss walked away, and Ruby was more disappointed about it than anything. When she saw John stuck in a tree, she went back and grabbed Ruby to get them moving towards the temple, and Ruby was just happy that she came back. Here, however, Weiss grabs Ruby, and Ruby is taken aback and seems nervous and looks like she's getting choked. Then the screen goes red and ominous music plays as we see the rest of the cast, which then shows Pyrrha retrieving her weapon and helping John. But in a case of spectacular incompetence, the music is still playing and John looks scared as Pyrrha talks to him, making it look like he is afraid of her, which makes no sense. Then we get Ruby and Weiss shit-talking to each other. Then it cuts to Yang fighting an Ursa, which in the original show was a fight with 2 of the Grimm and was a moment to show off Yang, her fighting style, and her semblance. And while she was able to beat one Ursa easily, Blake took out the other one. In Ice Queendom, the fight is Yang punching once and Blake stabbing it dead. That's it. Fight's over. Moving on. Then we get the fight between the Beowulfs, Ruby, and Weiss, which plays almost the exact same but with a major change. In the original, Weiss stopped her attack short to not hurt Ruby and accidentally set the forest on fire. In Ice Queendom, Weiss sets the forest on fire on purpose and kills multiple Grimm, and yet she still blames Ruby like it was her fault. Then the two get into a pissing match where Ruby acts like a little girl having a temper tantrum and Weiss is a huge bitch. At least in the original, both were mad at each other and got a bit heated, and they also had good points about each other, whereas here we have Ruby who had some good points about Weiss, and she just goes, well, at least I'm better than you, which I know is a line that was said in the original, but the thing is that something about the way the actress says it makes it come off less as 2 people bickering and making good points and more like an argument in a Walmart parking lot. And then they get attacked by a Nevermore. I can't believe a Grimm just saved a conversation. And now we have to talk about what was skipped over. So the talk between John and Pyrrha about Aura is completely gone. The fight that Ren had with the snakes is also gone. Also, so are all of the Ren and Nora moments leading up to this point. So if I were new and Ice Queendom was my introduction to Ruby, I wouldn't know who Nora and Ren even are. They also cut John accidentally bringing the Deathstalker into the temple, so it just shows up here with no explanation. Also, instead of Ruby and Weiss riding the Nevermore to the temple, they just run from it. Also, they keep the line about Nora riding in on a Grimm, but the animation doesn't show her riding. Instead, it just shows her hitting it and killing it. Then the Deathstalker and Nevermore show up, and a big change happens here. In the original, Weiss and Ruby had a brief conversation and try to patch up their relationship so they can work together to get through their current situation. Here, Weiss just acts like a creepy stalker around Pyrrha, and then they all run away. Also, Blake points out that they have to bring the relic back, not kill all the Grimm, and then Ruby points out that actually Ozpin said to kill all the Grimm in their way. Meanwhile, in the original, he just says not to hesitate to destroy the Grimm. I don't know if this is a translation issue, but it's still a case of inconsistent writing. So now we get Team Juniper versus the Deathstalker and Team Ruby versus the Nevermore. The Deathstalker fight is over and done in about 2 to 3 minutes and has none of the energy of the original. Also, they keep in the scene of Ren attacking the Thing's stinger and Pyrrha severing it, but instead of Nora hitting the stinger into the Deathstalker to kill it, Pyrrha throws her spear in it and Nora impales it with that instead. Meanwhile, the fight with the Nevermore takes about as much time and goes the same way as the original. Then we get a short scene of Ozpin assigning teams, and we get a hint of what is to come, with Weiss having some weird thorn pattern on her neck. Just fuck this episode. It adds nothing to the story aside from being a quick recap with none of the heart, charm, wit, or humor of the original. So I already mentioned not liking the argument between Ruby and Weiss in this episode, and you may wonder why. Well, it all comes down to character. In the original, the 2 arguments that the girls had in the forest helped establish things about these characters and why they were at odds with each other. Fundamentally, it came down to Ruby wanting to show that she was normal. She just wanted to show that she was not exceptional or a child that needed protecting, and Weiss wanted a competent partner who she wouldn't have to look after, but her pride and arrogance made it so that she couldn't see her own flaws or realize the potential in Ruby. Ice Queendom takes the bold approach of making Weiss a whiny bitch who doesn't listen to Ruby's legitimate criticism. Also, as I said before, the voice actress makes Weiss yell at Ruby instead of delivering the lines in a cold way. Meanwhile, Ruby is way more childish, but that's somewhat keeping in character, so whatever. The only thing I will say is that we miss out on a lot of character moments, so the rest of the cast feels the same as last episode or gets no development. No one has grown or changed, and we haven't even gotten the small moments from the original that added to the characters. So, yeah, fuck this episode. Okay, I'm just gonna rapid fire through this. The running animation feels too slow, so it feels less like people trying to run for their lives and more like they are going for an early morning jog. When Pyrrha and John are thrown by the Deathstalker, there is a delay between when their models hit the ground and the sound of them hitting the ground. There's no dust or smoke to help try and give a sense of weight and impact to the hard landing. By the way, the original show was able to give a greater feeling of weight and impact to characters, and it was made by a handful of animators. Also, you know how the original made the running animations look fast even if they weren't moving that quickly? They put the characters in an environment that was big enough that the speed that they were moving at felt natural, or at least felt like they were running. And they would also move the camera so that way you couldn't really focus on the actual speed the models were moving at. But in Ice Queendom, everything feels so small and close together, making their running look like something out of an old Flintstones cartoon. Also, it's clear they didn't want to animate a lot of action because most of the fighting is the characters standing around and firing on the Grimm like they're playing an FPS. They even take cover against the Deathstalker. You know, a big scorpion that melees people. Also, all the moving around the environment, including Nora using her grenade launcher and Blake using her sword, has been removed. The only time the animation kicks it up a notch is during the scene where Ruby is running up the side of the cliff to kill the Nevermore. And it's just a glory shot meant to look cool for the trailer. Which would be fine if it was the culmination of a long battle with cool animation, but instead it's at the end of a short battle where nothing communicated the level of threat to our characters' lives. It all felt easy, as if they knew they were going to win, or they had read the script. The music here is bland and generic again, and they even reuse music. Like, did they not have the budget to get another song in there or something? I won't repeat my complaints from before, but seriously, get some actual action music in there already. So, overall, this really fucking sucked. I think I'm going to have to make videos explaining more of these ideas in detail, but I refuse to put more effort in this show than Rooster Teeth fucking did. The good news is there's only one more episode where the comparisons come in, and after that I can review the show as its own thing. But I have no hope after going over this episode with a fine-tooth comb. See you next time, and do all this stuff for engagement. I'm gonna go lie down and contemplate my life fucking choices.